Hi there, this is Carl Irwin with another tutorial. This is going to be a different tutorial. We've done a Blender tutorial for this short film that I made for the purposes of demonstrating film scoring in Linux. We've done also a tutorial using MuseScore notation program to score to picture. So if you are a trained musician and can read notation and like to work on full score, or buy a full score for your MIDI sequencing and composition, you can do that to picture using the Jack audio server and the Jack transport capability, along with a video player like XJadio to sync your picture to your music. So we've looked at that. Now we're going to look at augmenting our sound palette here before we get into the MIDI sequencer side of things and start a Q Tractor session to bring in all of our MIDI data and apply more realistic instrumentation and various mixing techniques to it. We want to create some additional sounds. Now, I knew originally when I was going to do this little film here that I wanted to use some additional augmenting sounds. I just didn't know if I was going to be using some electronic sounds, using synthesizers, to kind of create those extra soundscape sounds, or if I was going to record some samples. I decided to record samples, and that's what we're going to look at today. So let me show you what I'm talking about here. If we watch a little segment of this short film, and you can hear some of the sounds in there that are not really orchestral or symphonic instrumentation. They're kind of augmenting extra sorts of soundscape sounds. So we're talking about sounds like that, sounds that are additional to a classic ensemble, sounds that augment the soundscape. They could be electronic, but they might be acoustic that have been processed, and we're going to look at how to create some of those things. So kind of like a little science lab experiment here. To do this, we're going to need some sound sources. So I just want to share with you what I came up with. Once I decided to just use acoustic sounds, real live sounds, I just used my cell phone to record them. And I found some objects in my in-laws' garage. I was on vacation when I did this and visiting them on the family farm. There were these bottles. These are bottles that are probably medicinal bottles from a long time ago. They were dug up from the ground when they were excavating for a building project. They saved them and held them aside just as a piece of history. And you can see that there's a variety of different sizes here, very small sort of medicine bottles to some larger ones here. And I decided to use these. I just blew across the top of them to get kind of that whistle sound that you can create. Some of them worked well, some of them didn't. But I managed to use, I think, all the sounds I made, whether they made great, sound or not. I thought they would suffice for what I wanted to do. The second grouping that I used was a few things here. This was just all sitting this way. This is my 4-year-old daughter's rake. It's just a child's rake. It's actually a metal rake, but it's a little small one for raking leaves. And then this is a chalkboard here with a fun little message sitting in the garage, and then a sap bucket sitting over here, something they have a lot of in New England for collecting sap. It's just decorative sitting here. What I did is I took the rake and I scraped the rake along the sap bucket for one sound, kind of a long sound. And then I took the rake and I took one of the tines in the rake and I scraped it on the chalkboard here. And you can imagine what kind of sound I got on that. So very slowly I scraped it and recorded it to get a few different sounds. So using these bottles here, and then also some items, just household items to record some sounds. And this is what I came up with. Okay, so the sounds that we're going after are these two sounds right here. This first one. It's a cacophony of sound. The second one here is a creak that I use later on in the film. And it's made from just a piece. Let me turn that up a little bit. It's made from just one of the elements that I recorded. So let's take a look at what we have here in Audacity. This is the original raw recording of all of the sounds. And you can see that at various points I have different elements happening, and there's some sound in between. I didn't use any of this haphazard sound in between, but I think we might find something to do with it here as we're discussing it. But let's listen very quickly. So we have these different bottles. I did some of them a couple times to get variety. This is the sound of me just moving around the bottle. So we might use that sound. Here's another example of a bottle. Second one. That one had some extra artifacts in it, so we won't use that. Then over here, I tried one of the small bottles. It didn't work out, but I still may use one of those sounds. Then this is the rake scraping. And then the rake on the chalkboard. So that's everything. Let's cut this up very quickly. So the first thing we want to do is isolate the sounds that we're going to be using. And the way that we'll do that is with the split tool. And addition these again. I like the first one better. This is destructive editing. Meaning that whatever you're doing is actually changing the waveform that you're working with. Q-Tractor is not destructive editing, or our door is not either. So it's the same sound. I'm going to take this one over here. Even though it seems to be the same pitch, it has a different sort of quality to it. And as I said, I did not use this before, but I think we might have a use for it. So I'm going to isolate this sound of knocking bottles here. I think I have an idea for that. I like the first one a little bit more. So take that one, slide this over. So bear with me as we do a little bit of cutting here. And that one is sounds like it was interfered with, so I'm just going to delete all of this. Take that one. And I think I'll take even that too. Get rid of this extra material in here. And we're almost there. Looks like the sound really starts right here, so I'm just going to delete all of that. Ends right there. This seems to really begin right around in here, so I'm going to split it right there. Do a little bit more cleanup. And there we go. We have all of our pieces isolated. One thing I'm going to do real quick is I'm just going to normalize everything out to 0. Now, what this does is by normalizing everything, we know that we have kind of a universal relationship in their volume settings later. So when we set our volume settings per track, we know that when we move the same amount for each sample, that it's going to have the same effect. And that's ideal. Rather than guessing, and I'm normalizing all of these separately because if we selected them all together to normalize, what it would do is it normalize everything to the loudest sample. So now they're all filling up the waveform width here. Okay, now the next thing we're going to do is let's count our samples up and see how many we have. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So 9 separate, looks like 9, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 separate tracks. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add 9 mono tracks to our project here. So we'll add a new mono track, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. And then what I'm going to do to make this quick, rather than copy and paste everything, I'm going to select the whole track and I'm going to mix and render to a new track down here. And what this will do is this will save aside our sounds in case we want to use them again later on. And I will just hit mute for that and close it up. So I can always return to my samples later on. Since I have these ones chopped up nicely, I'm just going to move each one into its own track. In fact, I can probably just minimize all of these so I can see a little bit better. So each one of these samples will get its own track, and we will mix and match them and adjust them in their own separate lanes. And once I've done that, I don't need the original mono track up there. So now I have everything split, I have everything separated. Let's start processing here. I notice that I have things sort of out of order. I could reorganize this a little bit. Let's say I could move my wave sounds for the bottles up next to each other. There we go. So just use our mover tool to get everything organized. The next thing I want to do, I'm going to zoom in a little bit here. The next thing I want to do is add a sort of a fade-in envelope to everything. So I'm going to select out here where I think that the wave ends, back to the beginning. I'm just going to apply a fade-in effect for everything. Now this is a destructive effect. I could use an envelope to do this, but I'm going to do it this way because it's a little bit quicker, and I know that what I'm doing I want to be permanent, so that's okay. This one ends right there. So again, I'm going out to the end where they release and applying this fade-in effect. This one I'm going to start right here. And I'm going to leave this one alone. I don't want to actually change this effect right there. I'm going to leave that. This is the sound of the bottles clinking together. But I do want to have a fade-in effect for this sound right here. So, oops. Be careful in selecting that you don't run into another lane because you can't very easily unselect by moving. So we'll fade it in for that. This is the scratching bucket, and then this is the screech sound down here. I'm going to leave that alone as well. Okay, so let's see what we can do. I'm going to organize these so that they all climax sort of together. So the way I'll do that is I'll take the longest sample, which is the scratching bucket down here, and I'm going to move that back. Then I'm going to take the other samples and I'm going to align them so that they all sort of end at approximately the same place. See how they all arrive at their climax at the same moment? Just like that. This is the sound of the clinking glasses. I'm going to solo this for a second. We're going to process this a little differently. So that's the original sound. What I'm going to do is I'm going to select it, and I'm going to apply an effect to this. I'm going to reverse it. This is a really great trick when you have random noises. If you reverse them, it gives a very electronic sort of sound to it, and it's just all you've done is processed it in one way. You've just reversed it. Let's see what this sounds like. It's a very fascinating sort of sound. I'm going to leave that the way it is now, and we'll align this one. I'm going to move it back because we're going to have a lot of loud sounds when we get out here, and we want to hear all this little detail. So I'm just going to keep this back a little bit. And then on the last one down here, which is the screeching sound, let me solo that for a minute. I want to duplicate this very quickly, so I'm going to select it and mix it down to a new track, and I'll move this up. For this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this one, the new one, I'm going to select all of it, and I'm going to change the pitch. So we're going to select change pitch without changing tempo. We don't want to change the speed. We just want to change the pitch. And because I've done this already, it's already set. I just want to make sure that my first letter here is the same, the note value. So let's say C to C, and I want to go from a higher number to the next number that's lower, so it's going to be an octave change. So from C3 to C2, and I hit OK. Now if we listen to this again, it's a much deeper screeching sound, okay? So we're going to use that one as well. Let me unsolo this. I'll solo my spare tracks down here. Whoops, rather, I'll mute our spare track down here. Let's mix all of this together so that it sounds good now. We have everything lined up. Let's move these screeching sounds. This is the lower one. I want the lower one to engage first, and then I want the higher ones to come in second. So I'm just going to move these over a little bit so we hear the lower frequencies first and the higher ones will come in. Let's pan each one of these sounds so that we create a stereo image. So I'm going to go to my first one, and actually I'm going to take my volume down quite a bit too because we don't want to clip. So I'm going to bring my volume way down here. Because they're all normalized, I know that when I move my volume, I'm universally moving the volume in such a way that it should affect every sample equally if I move the same increment. I'm going to move this one all the way to the left. We'll go to the next one down here. This one will go all the way to the right, and I'll slide down my volume for that one too. The next one down here will bring down the volume quite a bit, and I'm going to move this one somewhat to the right. And on the next one, bring the volume down again and move this one just somewhat to the left. I'm going to leave this one right in the middle, but I'm going to bring the volume down again. And I'll leave this one in the middle as well. But again, we'll bring the volume way down. I'm going to leave the volume up and leave it centered here for my reversed clinking bottles. I'm going to leave, I'm going to take this one down just a little bit. This is the scraping can, but just a slight bit because this is kind of the core of the cacophony sound. And then I'm going to slightly offset my stereo space for my screeching sounds. I'm going to move my higher frequencies a little bit to the right, the lower ones a little bit to the left. I'm just going to decrease the volume a little bit, just a slight bit for each of these. We'll see if we can manage to keep from clipping. So right now, if I listen back to this, and I want to watch my meters when I do this, I should hear what my cacophony sounds like with just raw sounds. You can see I'm clipping quite a bit over here. So let's go back in and we will pull down our volumes a little bit more, particularly on these louder sounds. I'll even bring this one down just a little bit. So let's see what we get now. Good, and we don't clip. So let's try that again from the very beginning. Okay. I feel like I'm missing these sounds a little bit, so I'm going to move them earlier. And I'm going to turn them up just a little bit, see if we can keep from clipping. That's good. Okay. All right, I like what we have here. For now, you might want to tweak this more. I could spend a lot more time on this and make it absolutely perfect, but for the sake of time, we'll call that good. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to select everything that I've used except for the spare track at the bottom, and then I'm going to hit Tracks, Mix, and Render to New Track. So at the bottom I have my entire cacophony put together. I can solo that. I'm going to normalize this to -6, and that will give me a lot of room to add some additional effects. I need to get some extra sound out at the end. Some silence, so I'm going to go to the end. I'm going to hit Generate Silence. I only need a few seconds. It says 30 seconds. That's okay. I'll just edit it and cut it when I need to. If I click right where they join, it will join those together. Now I have plenty of silence there to add a reverb effect. So let's go to Effects. I'm going to go down to Reverb. And I'm going to bump this back. We want a big room size, but not too big. We want a lot of reverberance, very little dampening. We don't want to dampen our sounds. So maybe push that down a little bit further. Wet gain is good. The dry gain, we want that low. We don't want to hear a lot of the dry sound. We want to hear most of the room noise, and we'll keep the stereo width up high. We can preview this. I might bring this down just a little bit, bring down the wet gain a little bit and the reverberance. Try that again. Maybe add in a little bit of the dry. And we'll just hit OK. So this is our new sound. What I'm going to do is I'm going to select all of it and then normalize it to 0. Some people like to normalize to just under 0, so like maybe -0.1 or -1. That's fine too. I just go right out to the end because I know I'm going to be bringing my levels down when I get it into the mix. And this is my final result. It's got a stereo image and everything. So what I want to do now is make sure that I can identify the place where there's no more sound going on. So right about out here. And I'm going to split. And then delete the extra space over there. So, yeah. So I know that my waveform is finished at that point. Now all I need to do is select it, the clip that I've made, just this section here. I go to File and I can hit Export, and I can export just the selected audio, and then that will allow me to save it as a WAV file for just that one sample. I made another one as well for this project, which was just a little bit of a screeching sound. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to select, let me solo my high frequency screech here. I'm just going to select a segment of a screech right there that is fairly loud, and I'll hit Copy, and then I'm going to add another mono track, and then I'm just going to paste that in. And what I want to do is add some silence into this, so I will generate some silence, and I'll just cut this, trim a little piece off, edit split, and I'm going to move my sample over, put my silence at the beginning, and I'll join all of these together, and I'll solo this track. I'm going to take this little screeching sound here, and I will normalize it to -6. This is for one extra sound that I have at the very end of the short film. And then I'll select all of it. I'm going to add my reverb effect again. And then I'll normalize it to 0. And then I can trim this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to trim off just a little bit from the beginning. I'm going to add a slight fade-in effect to soften that entrance. Stop out here where there's no more waveform. And clip boundaries, and then delete. So now I have my very short, creaky, sort of gate-sounding horror sound that I can use for the other section in my piece. So same thing again, I would select just that clip, and then I would go to export, and I could export just the selected audio as a WAV file. What I want to do is I want to save this project then, because I want to be able to go back and edit this again or use these samples again, and I can just archive this and put it aside. And remember that I have my raw samples right here that I can always return to those original recordings. But anyway, that's pretty much it in a nutshell. A little bit of sound design using some recorded sounds on a cell phone. Nothing really special about it. Just recorded some sounds, and because we're adding a bunch of effects to that, we can you really can use a recording of any quality. It doesn't have to be a very nice recording system, a nice swanky setup to get your sounds recorded. You can record on anything, including a cell phone. So a little bit of sound design there for you. I hope you find this useful. And in the next tutorial, we will be looking at the digital audio workstation Q Tractor, the session, where we will import everything. We'll bring in our MIDI files from our notation session, and we will bring in our soundscape sounds that we've just created. We will be adding through MIDI export to Linux Sampler some better sounds, some better sound fonts, and better samples in instrumentation, and we will be looking at articulation and mixing that all together in the next session. And then hopefully, if we have time in that tutorial, we'll look a little bit at mastering. If we don't have time, then I'll devote a single tutorial just to that topic of mastering your final output. Look at some ideas that I have and some details. It's a topic we've looked at before, but maybe we can get a little bit deeper into it. So hopefully you found this useful, and I wish you the best of luck with this, and happy mixing.